I am pleased to announce that this will be the first of several hearings on the status of women around the world. The committee has worked on a bipartisan basis to promote women in our development efforts through a number of bills that we've passed out of this committee, and I believe these hearings will allow us to build on that good work. Today, we look at the brutalization and oppression of women living under ISIS. This violence against women is almost without parallel, from widespread rape and trafficking to forced marriage and to murder. Female captives, including thousands of Yazidi women and girls, are sold as slaves in modern-day slave markets. One UN official described meeting with a woman in ISIS-occupied territory who was forced to marry 15 different men in 1 year. Some of these so-called marriages last only 3 days. That is life under ISIS for these women today. And as one witness will testify, much of this seemingly crazed and indiscriminate violence against women is, in fact, a sinister and quite calculated strategy that goes to the heart of ISIS's survival. By forcing local women to marry into ISIS, the group expands its demographic base while reducing the population of those diverse communities it seeks to eradicate and to replace. Simply put, ISIS needs women, needs to control them, to establish its caliphate, and give rise to the next generation of ISIS. And that is why ISIS is investing heavily in recruiting foreign women to join its ranks. And with each girl who becomes brainwashed, ISIS has a new poster child for its jihadi girl power propaganda. Sometimes it can seem like all we do is look at the worst of humanity. So I appreciate the efforts of Mr. Watts, one of our witnesses with us today. I appreciate his efforts to elevate the voices of those courageous individuals who are working to counter ISIS, often at great personal risk. For all the horrible atrocities being committed in this region, there are those incredible stories of strength and integrity, many of them from women and girls with the most to lose. From the Kurdish women on the front lines against ISIS, who declares that she fights to take back the role of women in society. And we appreciate the fact that so many of these Kurdish women, 30% of those battalions that you see, Kurdish battalions, are all women battalions fighting on the front lines. By the way, only with small arms and rifles, because they can't get access. We have not given them or sold them to the Kurds the long-range artillery or mortars or anti-tank weapons that they say they need. But they stand and they fight, as they say, to protect all women in society, and they protect others besides the Kurdish behind their lines. And we have the female responders pulling victims from the rubble in Syria. These female units that go out and take on that role. And we have the captured Yazidi girl described by Mr. Watts, who walked right past her would-be rescuers when she realized ISIS had staged an ambush for those rescuers, thus saving their lives at the expense of her own life. These stories inspire us to act. Credible voices need to be heard. They need to hear the fact that ISIS land is not a utopia. We must prioritize the physical and psychological welfare of those women and girls who have escaped from ISIS, many of whom have been subjected to unbelievable trauma. And we need to support leaders in the region who are confronting the stigma of sexual violence head-on and calling on families to welcome back male and female survivors with open arms. Although we focus today on ISIS, we know full well that Assad's brutality against Syrians include not only barrel bombs and starvation, but also widespread sexual violence. Ranking Member Engel and I have pressed for the consideration of no-fly or safe zones in the region, and we're pleased to hear of Turkey's recently increased cooperation with the United States on this issue. I had lunch with the Turkish ambassador last week to discuss this issue. I think this is a very important step. I also, just for a moment, wanted to thank Mr. Engel for his longtime support over many years of trying to get a focus on what was likely to be the blowback in Syria as a consequence of the violence there, and also his efforts where he worked with me and others on this committee when ISIS first came out of the desert and called for airstrikes. We went a year without doing that, and we watched ISIS take city after city after city across Syria and then across Iraq, and now have some 5 million souls under the control of ISIS. And I think our air power should have been used back then in order to degrade and slow or defeat them when they were targets out on the open desert. But I now turn to Ranking Member Engel, whose passionate leadership on the crisis in Iraq and Syria has been of great benefit, I think. And thank you, Mr. Engel.